Hello my friends, my name is Artur and I am an Estonian soldier.
It was really difficult for me.
Happy New Year my friends, 1st of January. Welcome back to the channel. I have taken a vacation of 1 week and now I am continuing 3 videos a week for you. You'll get your entertainment. USA versus the world. Can USA beat the whole world militarily? You ready for this? It's your country. Well, if it's against the world, then it's obviously against Estonia also. So this is the first video when we watch a war situation against USA and Estonia also, which I don't like. Because we are allies. But for the sake of the game, let's do it. Before we start, I want to bring out something in 2020 that happened. 2020 was a horrible year, I think, for everybody. And for me, what happened is I got depression. I got a burnout. I burned out doing YouTube and doing my other work as a musician. And I got depression. Now I'm on antidepressants and I'm fighting it. Depression shows you your weak point, shows you what you have to change in your schedule, your work life, your love life. So I'm changing those things. I'm going to a psychiatrist, psychologist. I'm changing my mind. But it has been quite hard for me to work after September. September is where I got it. It has been an uphill battle all the time, but I'm slowly winning. And you guys play a major role in that battle. You guys have supported me throughout 2020 and I'm so thankful for it, so thankful. I am blessed to have such an audience as you. Who am I? I'm a nobody. From Estonia, a small country in Northern Europe. For America it means nothing. You guys have been so supportive. So I want to name 3 new names, yes we carry on with that, to highlight the people who actually make this channel possible. We have Travis Tierney, thank you for becoming a Patreon. We have Andrew O'Neill, thank you for supporting the channel. We have Naoki Takahashi, oh, arigatou gozaimasu. If you want to support the channel, make sure I can focus on my mental health and don't have to do other work, then become a patron. The link is in the description below. Can USA beat the whole world? Let's see.
A superpower is defined as a state with the ability to exert influence or project power on a global scale, and if needed, in more than one region of the globe at a time. The United States, currently the world's sole superpower, fits this description, with an official military doctrine that states its military forces must be ready and capable to fight 2 major theater wars simultaneously, a capability no other nation on Earth can even approach.
That is true, to fight 2 fronts. Hitler tried it, failed. Germany at the First World War tried it and failed. No nation has ever been able to fight 2 fronts successfully. So if America states its official degree to fight on 2 fronts successfully, the most powerful country in the world.
But what would happen if the United States found itself in a war against the entire rest of the world? Ooh. How would that war potentially play out? The rules of this war game will be as follows. No nuclear weapons allowed, and war will be simulated to have broken out after weeks of preamble. As in a surprise attack, the United States with its forces spread around the world would likely lose its non-homeland forces entirely, but not before delivering crippling blows to most of the world's major powers and knocking them out of the conflict.
Yeah, if you think about it, US has military bases in few of the most powerful countries in the world. So if they can attack preemptively, that would knock the countries off the war immediately. How many countries has US military presence in? I think it's like 30 at least.
Early. The US's main opposition would be in the form of a European coalition to include Russia and a China-India alliance. The rest of the world's contribution would be mostly in material supplies or financial backing, as while even nations like Japan boast a formidable military capability, they mostly lack the ability to actually deploy that power outside of their own borders. In fact, that would be the biggest hurdle to any global offensive against the United States. With historical military preparations focused on conflicts such as NATO versus Russia or China versus India, most militaries around the world lack the ability to transport military hardware across the oceans in a meaningful quantity, making a decisive assault against the US homeland impossible. Meanwhile,
yeah, if you think about it, US has had to transport its equipment and men all the time across the oceans. It's used to it, it has the technology to do it. The rest of the countries don't, because they haven't done it. across the Black Sea, across the Adriatic Sea, Mediterranean Sea, of course, but not over the Atlantic Ocean. That's different. Countries don't have that infrastructure and ability to do it. 1 point for the USA.
While, due to its commitments to fighting wars well outside its own borders for the last 80 years, the United States operates the world's largest air and naval transport fleets that number in the hundreds of ships and aircraft, more than most modern nations combined. This lack of mobility will prove to be a major weakness for the global alliance and severely hinder their ability to respond to US actions. Today, the United States operates its forces in every geographic area of the world and has split its command structure into 9 combatant commands, 6 responsible for global geographic areas of responsibility. In the weeks leading up to the outbreak of war, the United States would likely pull its forces out of Europe and non-American bases in the Pacific, disbanding its European, African, and Southern commands. Pacific Command, Northern Command, and Central Command would absorb these forces. Battlefield 1, Middle East. US Central Command would receive an influx of former European assets, with the US bolstering its forces in the Middle East and bases in Afghanistan and Iraq with one goal: destroying the major oil refineries and distribution centers while denying access to the sea lanes that transport oil from the region.
Wait, why destroying? I have a question here. American war machine, like Nazi Germany's, runs on oil. We all know that, so why destroy them? Just take them over. I know it's easy to say take it over, but US is the most powerful military. Of course it can take it over if it wants to, with special forces, for example. Take it over and use the oil for your own good. Because US needs the oil very bad. And if you destroy them, the money to build it back up at the time would take too much and you couldn't make use of the oil. So you need to take them over, my friend, not destroy them. Look how many states have been the state of the day. Quarter of the states, 1/4 of the states. Has your state been the state of the day? Has it been the state that the most hats go to per video? If not, do something about it. You guys continue to amaze me. This is the second competition. First one was the Estonian YouTuber Cup, and now you guys are getting the hat for the second competition. I love you guys for doing this. Carry on, you are amazing. First of all, we have Michael Campus from Castaic, California, the sunny state. Texas is a sunny state. Indiana, Arizona, they're all sunny states, I think. Oh boy, it's the 10th for California. Texas and California both have 10 and Florida has 13. We have Artur Navakuku or Artur Navakuku. Navakuku would be a funny Estonian family name, and Artur is me. It's not me. It is native name, I'm quite sure. Navakuku. Fountain, Colorado. Your city name is Fountain. The Fountain of Youth. That's 6 for Colorado. We have Christopher Baldwin. Sir Baldwin. Sounds like nobleman, right? Lord Baldwin. Bow before Messina, New York. Also the 6th for New York. Timothy Ratican. He lives in the Vatican. Vatican? No, he doesn't. He's American. Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs is actually in Ohio. No, it is in Colorado. Gotcha there, didn't I? 7 for Colorado. Finally, we have Justin Colarossi. Rotterdam, New York. That means New York is the state of the day. New York hasn't been the state of the day. Let's learn some cool facts about it. Federal Reserve Bank in New York has the largest gold deposits in the world. It has $90 billion in gold. So if you go down there, you go blind. So much gold, it will just shine your eyes out. That's a cool fact about New York and the fact of the day for the state of the day. My friends, go and get the Estonian Soldier hat. Make our state the state of the day. Make it win for Christ's sake. And let's go back to the video.
81% of the world's oil reserves are located in OPEC countries, and over 60% of the world's oil passes through the Arabian Sea alone. The US's strategic goals would be simple: shut off the global oil tap. With the world's 12th largest oil reserves, the United States could easily supply itself while denying the rest of the world access to vital Middle East oil. Europe, which
okay,
would
okay.
represent the United States' most formidable adversary, relies on Middle East oil for 40 to 50% of its total annual use, meaning an American stranglehold on the region would cripple any European war effort as reserves run out and their economies begin to collapse. China would face a similar problem, as 50% of its total oil imports all come from the Middle East, making the region the first front in our war. At the outbreak of war, the United States would first strike at oil production and distribution facilities across the Middle East via carrier-based strike aircraft backed up by former European theater aircraft, now based off American bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. With the world's largest air tanker fleet and flanking the all-important Persian Gulf from both Iraq and Afghanistan, American aircraft could penetrate deep into Middle East territory with impunity, striking at targets from the Straits of Hormuz all the way to the Suez Canal itself.
We cannot forget about also when you need to be stealth and go deep into enemy territory and bomb and destroy some infrastructure. We cannot forget about the B-2 stealth bomber. It has been shot down once or hasn't been shot down ever, whichever stories you believe. Well, let's say it hasn't been ever shot down. It's the most powerful bomber in the world. It can fly 6,000 kilometers in one go, meaning it starts from US soil and it can bomb any infrastructure around the world with one go without being detected. It means whoever you are as a US enemy, your main infrastructure, main building, main command centers will be bombed out within 24 hours with B-2s, and you cannot shoot them down. You'll be knocked back to guerrilla warfare in no time. Hoorah! Why am I happy? I'm against the US here. What? No, bad.
Though regional forces would be able to offer some initial resistance, most operate outdated Soviet-era or non-modern American-built aircraft, with the exception of current US allies such as Saudi Arabia, who would be able to field modern variant F-15s, Typhoon Eurofighters, and Italian-British Tornado multi-role strike aircraft in small numbers. Without European support, however, the air war would go very poorly for Middle East powers for several reasons. Firstly, lacking a joint unified command, each nation would be unable to coordinate its air assets with its neighbors, resulting in confusion and low sortie rates. Most Middle East powers also field very few electronic warfare or early warning and control aircraft. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Israel would represent the most formidable threats to American air power, yet neither nation fields dedicated electronic attack aircraft, while the US is equipped with over 200, mostly F-35 variants and EA-18G Growlers. Without adequate numbers of AWACS and electronic warfare assets, Middle East powers would be unable to coordinate the large amounts of sorties needed to counter US air power, and they'd find their aircraft and ground-based air defenses actively jammed or spoofed by American EW assets. In the opening days of the Middle East War, the US would likely see moderate casualties among its air forces, as it would be mostly operating against obsolete aircraft and disorganized or inexperienced air forces. The greatest threat to US craft would come from ground-based air defenses, which range in obsoletism, yet remain a formidable obstacle to US air power. With a concentration of American power in the region, it's a foregone conclusion that Middle East powers would have begun to move their air defenses to protect vital oil shipping routes and manufacturing/distribution centers. Yet Desert Storm proved how effective the United States can be at dismantling a nation's air defense network, and most nations in the region have invested little into modernizing their defense infrastructures in the years since. The US would suffer most of its losses to its fourth-generation aircraft such as its F-15, F-16, and F-18s, while its fifth-generation F-35s and F-22s would prove much more difficult to contend with. With an inventory of 385 active F-35s, over 1,800
F-35Ss, what the hell? We talked about how many they want to order, and knowing the price tag of one F-35, this number is insane. I cannot imagine US having, in the end of this, 2,000 F-35s. Imagine 2,000 F-35s flying simultaneously over your head. You would go dead. Oh my god, this is an overkill, I think. If it was the war, US versus the world, this is what you need. This is when you need 2,000 of them. But now, what are they going to do with that many? Are they getting ready for a war against China? Or what?
100 more on order, and 197 F-22s, the US retains the only operational 5th-generation air fleets, with current allies fielding a token force of F-35s purchased from America, and the Russians and Chinese still not fielding combat-ready 5th-generation aircraft. Despite its technological and operational superiority, however, sheer numbers would present a threat to American forces. So instead of seizing key oil production or distribution facilities, the US would instead focus its efforts on keeping those facilities and trade route choke points shut down while defending against attacks on its air bases. A single sunk supertanker could block the Suez Canal for weeks, shutting down one of the most important oil trade routes in the world, while constant harassment by American air power would make the Straits of Hormuz impassable. With few major naval threats in the Pacific, American Pacific naval forces would be split between containing China and bolstering US Central Command forces in establishing a blockade of trade routes across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. With 20 carriers, 11 of which are super carriers, more than the rest of the world combined,
20 carriers, oh my god, here we go again. The rest of the world, as I understood, has 11 carriers combined, and US has 20, and one of them is enough to take down an entire country. This is crazy. The radars, the technology on board one carrier can guard a very huge amount of water. So for this blockade, they would have to use even not all of the carriers, I think. They would just need a few to blockade the entire ocean from any ship passing. It's not like Second World War where radars were weaker, and look how much harm Nazis could do to sink British cargo ships. But now radar has been perfected. Nothing is coming through that blockade.
Blockade of the Indian and Pacific Oceans would be easily achieved. With a staggering 80% of global oil trade passing through the Indian and Pacific Oceans, the rest of the world would be forced to abandon any plans to attack the US homeland and first try to dislodge the Americans from the Middle East. Yet they would be doing so while operating on a ticking clock as domestic oil reserves begin running dry. In a prolonged conflict, immediate development of oil reserves in Russia would begin, though with only 80 billion barrels of proven reserves versus over 800 billion in the Middle East, it would be imperative for the global coalition to dislodge the US from the region or face eventual oil starvation and defeat. Europe would be faced with the
It's crazy how nowadays, and from the Second World War, any war almost is about oil. Even if it's not about oil, oil will play the most major factor in that war, because if it runs out, you cannot move your armies, you cannot attack, you cannot use any technology. We're not at the level yet where you have tanks and machinery running on electricity. We are not there. We don't have, robots that have solar energy. We're not there. We're fully on robust oil if it comes to the military business. In the civilian world, of course, you have electric cars, electric motors, all of that stuff, but you cannot utilize that in military equipment because it will let you down. Oil is robust. Internal combustion engines are robust, they work. So entire military of the world runs on oil.
Difficult decision of committing the majority of its air and naval power to a Middle East campaign, yet with an American Navy larger than the next 8 navies in the world combined, they would be doing so at the risk of leaving their coasts vulnerable to harassment from American attack submarines and carrier strike groups. American attack submarines in particular would prove to be an overwhelming force, with 55 nuclear attack subs alone. Europe, to include Russia, fields nearly 100 submarines, yet only about a third of those are nuclear powered and range from 10 to 25 years behind US subs in tech. Lacking in major transport capabilities and the ability to adequately protect either their sea lanes or any attempts to move troops by sea, the global coalition would be extremely hard-pressed to dislodge the US from the Middle East. While an eventual overwhelming of US ground forces would be possible, it would take weeks of buildup and slow moving of forces via ground routes to avoid American submarines. Victory in the Middle East would be possible for the global coalition, but would only come at great expense of dwindling oil reserves, and any attempts to reopen the Middle East trade routes would certainly fail, as the US would concentrate its nuclear attack subs and carrier battle groups in the region. The coalition would be forced to rely on existing land-based pipelines, though these would not be enough to sustain the world economy, and the United States would certainly commit its stealthy B-2 bombers to the destruction of these pipelines and any attempts at building new ones.
Yeah, we got the B-2 now. B-2 is a major factor. It's just one plane, I know, but it plays a major factor. It makes the US able to hit anything, anywhere, anytime, without being detected, which is a huge thing. You can take down anything. Nobody can do anything against you. And one of them costs over 2 billion, I mean, of course.
In short, a land victory would be probable for the global coalition, but without the ability to challenge the US Navy, global trade routes would be permanently shut down, effectively crippling the economies of coalition nations and the war effort. Battlefield 2, West Pacific. The West Pacific and South China Sea is the most economically important waterway in the world, with a full 1/3 of all global trade passing through the area, or about 5.3 trillion.
In the first battlefield, we talked about cutting off 80% of the world's oil. Now we're talking about 1/3 of all global trade. You got the trade, you got the oil, you got everything. The whole world will starve if US forces its navy to blockade these routes. Whoo boy.
Dollars. China, South Korea, and Japan would especially have a vested interest in keeping these sea lanes open, yet none of those nations field a true blue water or deep ocean navy. In a global war, the United States would invest the majority of its expeditionary firepower in the West Pacific, having little to fear from an Atlantic incursion by European powers due to their lack of major military transport capability and navies designed for decades to engage Russian ships in literal combat rather than blue water operations. Japan would pose a significant challenge for US forces due to its very modern and robust self-defense forces, yet the island nation could be largely ignored due to Japan's lack of air tankers, limiting the range of its strike aircraft and 70-year self-defense military doctrine, which saw the nation only recently begin.
US rewrote Japan's the main law that it can only have, I think, 100,000 soldiers for self-defense. This has been true for 70 years and the military doctrine in Japan has been only for self-defense. But now recently they started enlarging their military. But still, if your military is only self-defense, you don't have offensive weapons. Your strategies and everything have evolved differently. So if you need to offense, you're not very good at it. I think we don't need to worry about Japan here, yeah.
With 155 F-15s making up the bulk of Japan's air force and only a combat range of 790 miles, it is doubtful the island nation would risk its 5 operational airborne refueling tankers to attempt offensive operations against the US Navy and its over 1,000 fighter aircraft, instead holding its air forces in reserve in case of an American attack on the homeland. The US's first goal in the region would be to cut off all trade routes passing through the South China Sea. China would represent the US's biggest global adversary, yet like every other global power, to include Russia, it too lacks the navy and the transport capability to actually threaten the US homeland. In order to deny the nation the opportunity to build this capability, the US would immediately move to cut off Chinese trade through the South China Sea, something China would be particularly vulnerable to as over 60% of its trade is delivered by sea. Though China lacks a navy formidable enough to threaten US Pacific forces, it more than makes up for this shortcoming with its ballistic missile forces. Its DF-26 ballistic missiles each have a range of 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers and would threaten any US base or ship as far out as Guam. At the outbreak of war, China would immediately launch a withering missile strike against American facilities on Guam. While Guam would be defended by THAAD, or Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Anti-Missile Systems, Aegis-equipped destroyers, and Patriot missile batteries, China would rely on heavy saturation strikes and overwhelm American missile defense systems, decimating the majority of American ground targets on the small island and rendering it inoperative as a military forward staging area for weeks.
Okay, Guam is out, but we all know US has Zeus, incredible automatic miniguns or Gatling guns that shoot down missiles, and it has other anti-missile defense systems, but I heard that China's counter for this is to actually overwhelm those systems. It means to shoot so many missiles to so concentrated area that the missile defense systems cannot shoot them all down. I'd like to see that picture from the side would be so cool. There would be so many explosions in the air. But seeing how effective civs are, they can shoot down quite a lot of missiles quite fast.
This would force America to rely on its naval assets in the region, which would be the secondary targets of China's opening barrage. Though long touted as carrier killers, China's DF-26 and DF-21 ballistic missiles each rely on a very long and complex kill chain, or chain of military assets required to recon a target, track it, and guide a missile to it. In order to accomplish this, China operates 30 Yaogan tracking and reconnaissance satellites grouped into constellations that, working together would provide China 16 opportunities per 24-hour period to accurately target a US Navy vessel to within 10 kilometers anywhere in the Pacific. The US would certainly seek to counter this capability with deployment of its anti-satellite weapon systems, of which it remains extremely secretive about. It is impossible to infer just how effective US anti-sat weapons truly are due to a lack of information, but it is known.
This is space war. We don't have this yet. US is the only country in the world to have Space Force. Officially, Trump declared it, but we don't know any weapons about it. We don't know anything they're gonna do there. Yes, Thor's hammer. We have heard about it when US shoots down rods of steel to explode the forces on the ground, but this is yet to happen. We don't know anything about Space Force or space weapons, but I'm sure they're testing them in the US already.
That in the early 2000s, the US Air Force successfully tested a deployment of mini-sats designed to kill or hijack enemy satellites, and in 2008, the US successfully targeted and destroyed a defunct satellite with an SM-3 missile launched from the USS Lake Erie in the Pacific. With every US destroyer and cruiser able to carry the SM-3, this could potentially pose a serious threat to Chinese space assets and degrade the capabilities of their ballistic missile forces. In a push into the Pacific, however, the US would still suffer heavy casualties among its fleet due to Chinese long-range missile strikes. It's probable then that while it works to destroy Chinese space assets from afar, America would instead send its nuclear attack submarine fleet to blockade Chinese waters. China operates about 60 submarines, yet for years, those subs did not go on patrols or even leave port as they were often sidelined by maintenance issues. Only as recently as 2011 did Chinese subs actually begin to leave port, giving US subs the opportunity to tail them and discover that Chinese submarines were surprisingly easy to find and track due to their noisy nature. Defense experts estimated that Chinese sub-technology was 10 years behind Russia and about 20 years behind the US.
Oh boy,
the US, meanwhile, operates 55 nuclear attack submarines, with most of these being of the modern Virginia class. Armed with torpedoes and a complement of Tomahawk cruise missiles, Virginia attack subs could easily threaten Chinese surface and subsurface vessels and join its Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines in cruise missile attacks against Chinese inland industrial and military.
What is the point of even having submarines as the enemy of the US if your subs are 20 years behind? You would put a lot of money and energy and resources into those submarines and they would just be destroyed immediately because they're just too noisy. So I don't see the point in this. Yes, you have those subs, but they cannot leave the port, otherwise they would be sunk immediately by the Ohio class, because this is so much better. This is a logic error here. As a China, right, as a country, you have invested billions into making those submarines, which just are not good enough. So in the end, they're not worth it.
Military installations. While in recent years, China has invested heavily into improving its anti-submarine warfare capabilities, it is still critically behind even regional powers such as South Korea and Japan, meaning that in the end, there is likely little China could do to stop US attack subs. Though it could likely keep American carrier battle groups out of the South China Sea for the first week or two of the war, China would be helpless to prevent a naval blockade by US attack subs. India, also reliant on South Pacific trade routes, would certainly dispatch its naval forces to attempt to break a US blockade, but would face the same issues in challenging US subs that China would. Having only 15 active submarines, and also lacking in modern anti-submarine warfare capabilities, the Indian Navy would quickly find itself overpowered by American attack subs. Employing a combination of its submarine and anti-satellite assets, the US would likely break through the Chinese ballistic missile shield within 30 days and enact a complete blockade of the South Pacific, strangling regional powers economically. With a blockade of Middle East oil exports, the global war would then become a war of attrition, with the US starving out the world's major powers, while able to sustain itself off its own domestic oil.
It always becomes a war of attrition. Any war from the Second World War, even wars before that a little bit, are wars of attrition. Hitler needed to take the Soviet oil fields. He knew he had only about 2 years of war until his oil runs out. He thrust to the oil fields and he couldn't take them. And then he was doomed. Every war is a war of attrition, actually. And if you know how to win in long term, then you are the winner. Short victories, they don't usually happen in wars. You might get incredibly lucky, but usually no.
Reserves. Having little to fear from a European transatlantic offensive due to Europe's lack of major military transport capabilities, American forces would be free to initiate ground offensives against Canada and Venezuela in order to seize its oil reserves as well. Ultimately, the US Navy, the largest and best equipped in the world, would be the deciding factor in a global war. With such overwhelming firepower superiority, the United States would be able to fight defensively and without launching any major ground offensives outside of North America. Fielding a larger fleet than the next 8 navies combined, the US Navy, backed by the US Coast Guard, could easily defend the Atlantic sea lanes from any European incursion, while enacting blockades of major oil shipping routes through the Persian Gulf and Indian and Pacific Oceans. While the world would eventually be able to muster a large enough force to threaten the US, current military capabilities across the globe would be insufficient to prevent these naval blockades and would require years of buildup and expansion of navies from every modern nation. With the majority of global oil trade shut off by naval blockade, however, European and Asian economies would quickly shrink or outright collapse, making such a buildup improbable and ensuring an eventual US victory. Yet that victory would come at a titanic cost to even the US's own economy, and in the end, the entire global economy would likely shrink to levels not seen since the end of the Second World War.
The answer I got out of this was US would win, but at a very high cost. And also it would be a war of attrition. It mostly would be about oil, let's be honest here. And also we found out how many years US is ahead with their tech. Aerial and naval is the best factor here. You can feel good about yourself if you are from the US. You know that your country could take on the entire world. And it's probably will go to space first and, you know, weaponize that also and colonize other planets. It's all US. I don't think China or Russia will do it. So yeah, you can pat yourself on the back. You're paying for this. I am glad we are actually allies, Estonia and US. I'm glad you guys are supporting this channel. Allies supporting each other. I am all for that. Thank you, my friends, for watching. Thank you for supporting. Go and get the Estonian YouTuber Cup and the Estonian Soldier hat. And until my next video, stay cool and bye bye.